Hello, my fellow Hoosiers. I will say that because I grew up in Indiana, the state of Indiana. I hope you're all doing well. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about allegory in painting. Allegory is basically a hidden meaning or narrative that you come to through examining the signifiers and the signified in the painting. The works that come to mind to me right at the top of my head are William Hogarth's etchings and paintings. The one I'm thinking of is called The Progress of the Rake, and it basically shows the ascension of what is now referred to as a gold digger, basically from the lower class to the aristocracy, basically. Real quick correction on the Hogarth painting series I mentioned earlier is actually called The Rake's Progress, and I got it confused with another series of his called The Harlot's Progress. So the Harlot's Progress tells the tale of a prostitute who ascends through class ranks of society into the aristocracy. Rake's Progress is a story of a guy with some awesome British name like Tom Rakeford or Rakerton or something like that. And it's the story of him starting out in poverty, inheriting a bunch of money, and then basically squandering all the money away and ending back up in poverty. So that's a correction. And check these paintings out. They're rife with allegory. Little symbols here and there everywhere throughout the paintings, kind of telling you the story of the person or the character depicted in the story. So yeah, check them out, William Hogarth. So I guess I use allegory in my painting in a similar way, but more so in the sense that I spoof or satire or parody a lot of classical paintings and try to arrive at a different meaning than what was intended originally. So turning these kind of art historical tropes upside down to give them a new meaning. And I often use humor to kind of filter that meaning. And mythology is basically just a source of inspiration for me. And not only the stories, but the old paintings of all of those great myths of, for example, Hercules, or, the love stories, Diana and Actaeon, or any of those. Mythology, a lot of times, in and of itself, is allegorical. Those stories were meant to teach a lesson a lot of times, or explain something in nature, right? For examples, I forget this exact story, but one of those dudes chases a mistress through the woods and ends up turning into some sort of plant, right? That happens a lot in mythology. So it's an explanation of why this plant is beautiful, where it is, why it blooms when it does, et cetera, et cetera. But furthermore, I think that mythology is a strong vehicle for allegory, if to put it simply. Just the mere fact that those stories were meant to kind of teach people about themselves in a lot of ways is an interesting springboard for me as a painter and an artist to kind of reinterpret those situations and apply them to our contemporary society. And it's interesting for me to see what that looks like in a lot of ways. And I like to think about those sorts of things, I guess. So basically, that's what I'm here to teach you and talk to you about is allegory, and I'm going to work on a painting and show you a dry brush blending technique. Very simple, very easy to do. So here's some work I started in Indiana, Pennsylvania at the Spruce. Unfortunately, none of these are quite finished, but they're all getting very close. So I started about 4 of these in Indiana. I'm not sure which. And they're based on a series of paintings Zurbaran made that were based on Hercules. So in these, I have usurped Hercules, taken his position. For your materials, you'll need a painting that you're working on, perhaps a reference photo. Here's what I've been working on. You will need a palette, paint brushes, mediums, solvents, that sort of thing. Here's my paint tray, paint cart. And for this dry brush technique, you'll need a soft, kind of blunt paintbrush. This is the one I use. It helps blend. I like the tapered edge so I can kind of get into tight spaces in the painting and move paint around. Here's my paintbrush set up. Modeling clay is a good stand. Just jam things in there when you're not using them if you want to keep them wet. keep a color on them. Here's my palette. Here's my colors that I've squozen, if you will, out of the tubes. The colors I've mixed kind of keep towards the edge. It's like a nice big open field for mixing more color. These are all my different solvents, properly labeled, of course. So this is a 5:1 ratio of Gamsol, or a solvent, to varnish, to like a stand oil or your linseed oil. And then I go down to a 1:1 ratio. These are good for use in alla prima painting, which is technique of painting wet into wet, which will come in handy with this dry brush technique. So the dry brush technique in alla prima oil painting is essentially just a blending technique. So in your wet paint, you essentially take a dry brush, not a wet brush, and use it to blend and push the paint into the areas you need it to be, soften up the edges, find shapes. You know, the push and pull process. Oop, I missed. That is oil painting. So we want to soften these edges and then go back in with our wet brushes, build them back up, soften them again, etc., so on into eternity until you're done and the painting is a masterpiece. So you can see where I'm at now after further blending and finding more shapes, pushing the darks, pushing the lights. Still not quite there, but it's going to take some work, some time, but that's why we do this, right? Thanks for taking the time to join me today in painting and learning a new skill. I want to thank Hannah and Ariana and the Pennsylvania Rural Art Alliance, the Spruce Residency, of course, and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Thank you for providing this program for people, and I think it should be interesting. And let's do it again sometime. In the famous words of Bob Ross, happy painting.